McGillicuddy and Murder's Pawn Shop, Season 5, Episode 8. Ghost in a Friend. October 30th, 1921. Continued. Scotland and I stood in the back aisle of the medical supply store, staring at each other. It was such a bizarre experience, Diary. She was a night enthusiast. My brain scrambled. My brain tried to believe that. But the rest of me was so sure I was looking at a friend. All I felt was relief. That relief was dangerous. Her loyalty was to them now, not to us. Not to the good fight we had been fighting together before. Scotland was not my friend. But I looked at her and was sure she was. Scotland glanced towards the back of the shop to see if the shopkeeper was watching us. He was busy scribbling in his ledger, and probably wouldn't have noticed if we danced a polka. Scotland looked back at me, and suddenly there was a glint in her eye. Hunger. That was when I began to be afraid, when I began to realize that this person looked like Scotland, but wasn't her, not really. There was something lizard-like in her eyes. Feral. "Maud," she said. This was the moment. My stomach turned to soup. This was when she could teleport, go straight to the night enthusiasts, tell them that I was alive. She could also reach into her pocket and pull out a gun or a potion or anything, really. Something that contained the death to all my spell. Something that would leave me as a night enthusiast. I had to keep her interest. "You're alive," Scotland said. "As you see me," I said. She blinked, slowly. I tried not to stare in paranoia at her hands. Would she reach for something? "Before you do anything," I said, "I have a dangerous proposition for you. A science experiment. I want to know if you're willing." "A science experiment?" she said. "Yes," I said. "I want to try something. It's never been done, but I think it will work. Please bear with me for just a moment. I know you'll find the theory as fascinating as I do." "Why can't you try it yourself?" Scotland said. "Because my soul is still intact," I said. "What?" she whispered. Slowly, I pulled the ghost bottle from my satchel. The bottle glowed like a lamp, liquid in its luminescence, and Scotland's features were washed with gentle green. "I have in this bottle," I said, "what I think is the missing piece of your soul. And I was wondering if you would let me put it back in." Then, oh diary, something flashed in Scotland's eyes. She missed it. She missed being whole. She had regret. The night enthusiast in her wasn't convinced this was good. It was like I'd reached into the brainwashing and woken her back up. "I'll do it," she said. So suddenly it startled me, and that's when I knew that Scotland, the real Scotland who was still in there, was willing to try anything to get herself back. "It's not guaranteed," I said. "This is one of the ghosts from the haunted house. It claims it's you, and I do think that's what the ghosts have been all this time. But it could be a trick, an evil spirit, something else." Scotland gazed hungrily at the bottle. A gleam of quick thinking came into her eyes, and she gently roped her arm through mine and led me to the front door. "Let's head to the alley, shall we?" Sounded like a good place for a murder, but I felt a tremble of desperation in Scotland's arm. How profound, diary, to crave being human again. We walked around back, where no one could hear us or see us but the bricks. Wrath was elsewhere looking for her. It was just me, if something went wrong. I wondered if she would trick me now, use me, destroy me, or if she really did just want to come home. "How will I meld with the ghost?" she said. "Well," I said, "if it's a monster, then it will try to possess you. If it's you, then I hope you would stick back together again, like water going back into the ocean." "Uncork the bottle," she said. "Are you sure?" I said. I was suddenly terrified. What if this did turn out to be a trick? What if we couldn't trust the ghosts? Were they us? Or were they something else? Something in that moment told me, diary, and I got cold to the end of my fingers, that this wasn't going to work. I'm sure, Scotland said. I agree to this. I understand the risks. Let the ghost out, Maud. I suddenly couldn't do it. I had Scotland fascinated. Perhaps we could do more research together before... I wasn't quick enough. Scotland reached across and took the bottle from me. Before I could open my mouth, she wrenched off the lid. The vapour of the ghost rose into the air, almost like luminous wings on the front of Scotland's body. For a moment, her face was hidden by the haze of spirit. Then, as she inhaled, the ghost was sucked into her torso. For a moment it gleamed like smoke in her mouth, and there was a glow in her eyes. Then, she was just a normal woman, standing there. My feeling of foreboding was gone. The ghost bottle felt like an ordinary bottle. Could this possibly be? Was it possibly? "Maud," Scotland said. She stepped right up to me and threw her arms around my neck. Scotland is taller than me, and I was utterly engulfed. Scotland is also meticulous and brave, so imagine my surprise when she began to sob. Diary, no one could fake sobs like that. She blubbered. She wheezed in and out with delighted, relieved breaths. She laughed and snuffled and moaned. I had a very sticky shoulder a few minutes later. We just stood in the alley, my hands knotted together behind her back, holding her close. It did seem silly to ask it, but I had to know. "Are you back?" I said. Scotland stepped aside. There was no mistaking the look in her eyes. Night enthusiasts have a kind of vacancy, a hardness. She was vulnerable, rich, alive. All of her was at the surface, shining out. I felt my heart crack with relief. So the ghost wasn't a trick, after all. It had worked. "I feel wobbly," she said, like the missing soul pieces are inside of me, but still separate. Does that make sense? I feel patched, but not whole, like a broken teacup being held in place. But I think," she continued, that is enough for now. I am back. The humanity is back, Maud." She seized me by the shoulder and swung me around. "You have no idea how horrible it is to be a night enthusiast, to hate everything they are, and then become them." Scotland and I teleported to somewhere safe, which I decided should not be me and Rath's houseboat just yet. Just in case. Just in case at the end of the day something was somehow still wrong. Scotland and I strolled in some Spanish gardens, smelling the thick, heavy perfume of white flowers and feeling the warmth of the sun on our faces. I caught her up on everything, while still holding some information back. I explained how the fake corpse had worked for my pretend death, without telling her about Dolores or where she was. I wondered how Dolores was doing, now that she'd gained her grandmother's unique magic unusual power, the ability to physically summon anyone by holding one of their hairs. Well, I hoped she was putting it to ethical use. So I didn't tell her about Dolores. I said Rath and I had a hideout, but I didn't say where. Finally, I explained the thing that made me the most nervous. "Diary, I am not sure how to navigate any of this without taking obscene risks. That's why it's so tricky." I told Scotland, up front, that I was worried the spell had left her with latent loyalty to the night enthusiasts, that even though her personhood was back in full force, she might still think they were the source of all goodness in the world. As soon as I said that, Scotland snapped her fingers. "Oh, that's why I've been feeling positive about the night enthusiasts. It's very strange, Maud. It's like I'm divided. I hate them. My mind is firm on that, but I've got this warm, inviting feeling whenever I think about them. Like they're a pleasant drug, something that will make me feel good." She bristled. "Well, now that I know that, I'll simply keep an eye on the feeling. I'm sure in a day or two it will have worn away." "Yes, but what if it didn't?" Well, lastly I told her about Rath and the cadaver. That was when her eyes got hard, and she looked at me like maybe she was going to break something. "He has a completely alien substance in him, and it's turning his liquid blood phosphorescent. What was he thinking, letting that thing in?" "In case you hadn't noticed," I said, "you have a completely alien substance in you right now." "Yes, but I'm not insane," Scotland said. She rubbed her arms in dismay, staring straight ahead, thinking, "Oh, Maud, I just want something to be normal again. Normal without any surprises or hiccups or threats. Is that too much to ask?" It seemed it was. I had Rath back as my friend, but he was ill. I had Scotland back, but she still felt a nagging loyalty to the night enthusiasts. It was like I was hounded by my worst fears. Friends who are only friends on the surface. friends who will turn subtly into what once betrayed me. Well, Scotland said, get me straight to him. We will need to see what we can do. Do you think you can cure him? I said. This wasn't exactly covered in my education, she said, but I have done a lot of reading on the side, about magic unusual spells and curses. It takes more to be a doctor to magic unusuals. I will see what I can do. Scotland and I returned to the houseboat, where Wrath was sitting up in one of the bunks. Oh, he said, rather idly, looking at Scotland. I see you found her. I had a sense that you'd found her, you see, and so I came back here. Scotland smiled and stepped up to Wrath. She took his wrist, checking his pulse as a first step. Did you, Wrath? She said, or were you just tired and came back early? Wrath looked at me. I don't like her, he said. She's still a night enthusiast. That gave me a cold feeling in the pit of my stomach, but then, just because I'm being stern, it doesn't mean I'm being evil, Scotland said. She opened Wrath's mouth and looked inside. I don't really believe in fortune-telling. I assumed you don't want Maud to think you were being lazy, but I highly doubt you sensed that I'd been found. You live in a magical world, and you don't believe in fortune-telling, Wrath said. He glared at me. Maud, make her stop poking around in my mouth, and make her stop insulting me. I smiled. Wrath, you know we were after Scotland expressly because you need a doctor. Well, make her expressly go back, Wrath said. He huffed. Scotland hummed as she went around her work. I wondered if Wrath really had sensed that I'd found Scotland. Could his madness be a kind of second sight? And was he using that second sight right now, when he said Scotland was still a night enthusiast? Or was he only being petty? I don't like it when you poke me, Wrath said. You did this before, in the prison. I haven't forgotten. You always go around touching me like I'm a bowl of soup. Scotland glanced at me, as if to say, Can you please make him be quiet? Scotland, I said, you're going to have to ask him first. He's not a bowl of soup. But, Scotland said, Doctor. But, Wrath said, Patient. Scotland broke out laughing. I smiled to one side. Fine, she said. Wrath, I apologize. I would like to examine you, to see if I can get to the bottom of this cadaver incident. May I examine you? Wrath folded his arms and said smugly, No. Scotland and I both yelped in dismay. What? No, Wrath said. It's fun to say. No, 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 no. Scotland tilted her head and glared at me as if to say, Was it for this that you dragged me across town and risked bottling up a ghost? Wrath, I said, you are ill. No, Wrath said, arms still folded. Don't want her poking. Fine, Scotland said. She took a step back. She studied Wrath from 2 feet away. I can see you've lost a lot of the wooden pieces, Wrath. That must be encouraging. It is, Wrath said. And how do you feel? Does your body feel better or worse than it did before? A funny thing happened. With the distance between the two of them, Wrath's childishness seemed to melt away, and they began to converse like 2 adults. There was an even calmness, a matter-of-factness in Wrath's voice that I'd never heard before. Surely that was a sign that the cadaver had been a part of him, that he was more Hester than he had been in a long time. I felt like I was listening to Hester. Scotland asked him dozens of questions, occasionally stopping to make a note in her notebook. Knowing I was of little use here, I began to wander back and forth inside the houseboat. I began to yearn diary. What was my life before this adventure? Nothing. It was all just for other people. Get married. Accept marriage proposals when they are offered and don't look back. By that logic, I should be married to Henry Hubert, living for him, washing his socks, smiling and being glad that I was at least useful to someone. Or perhaps, if not married, still typing all day for Mr. Levy, glad and grateful, so grateful, that I was at least useful to someone. I was a cog in a machine, and didn't that feel nice? But it didn't feel nice. Oh, it's one thing to work a job for the sake of your passions, working all day so you can paint or travel the world by night. But I was for other people. I was not for myself. And that was the most dismal of feelings. I could feel something growing, this exultation, this sense that when this is all over, not if, but when I make it, when my friends are restored and I reach the end of your pages, I'm going to stand on tiptoe and look at the world. I have spent my life being for others. Lately, I have spent it cleaning up the wild adventures that have led me to where I am. But after this adventure, I am going to just enjoy. I am going to be for me. I wish I knew who had left my china eye in the pawn shop that day. Who put it there so that I could find it. Someone unlocked my powers by giving it to me, by leaving it there. In a sense, it was Mr. McGillicuddy, because he told me that I could take it home, but still. Who bothered to take that broken piece from Mara's kitchen floor with the teacup smashed and lay the fragment tenderly in that exact spot? My whole life changed because of that moment, and I don't know who did that for me. I was deep in the midst of these reveries, diary, when someone knocked on the houseboat door. I looked to the left and counted. 1 Rath, 1 me, 1 Scotland. Who was outside? Rath and Scotland went silent. I told myself I was being silly. It was probably just the real owner of this houseboat come to kick us out. I lifted my shoulders, walked to the door, and opened it bravely. The person standing there, in the twilight glow, was not the owner of the houseboat. It was Noble James. Noble James, my friend, a night enthusiast. Noble James. He stood there, holding a large contraption under his left arm. I was so surprised to see him, and so bewildered, that at first I didn't recognize the machine. Why would I? It was just an odd thing, like a giant telegraph machine or something from the magic unusual post office. But as I stared at Noble's face, wondering if he was here to change us back into night enthusiasts, I couldn't stop thinking about the machine. I had seen it somewhere before. I knew it. "Maud," he said. His eyes filled with tears. Relieved tears. I waited for something bad to happen, and that's when I recognized the device under Noble's arm. It was the machine Raster used to track us. I had seen it using it the night when I'd gone after him. This was it. This was the machine. That's when I noticed Noble had some bloody bandages in his pocket, the dried blood glowing bright in the twilight. "What are you doing here?" I breathed. "I knew you were still alive," he said. "I knew it. I knew it had to be true. That's why I just..." He tapped his heart. "I knew you weren't dead." "Noble," I said. "He had found us. He was a night enthusiast. He was going to tell the others. My fake death had been for nothing. We weren't safe." "Maud," he said, "I'm halfway back to being myself. Enough that I'm not a night enthusiast anymore. I've found a cure. I found a way to grow my missing soul back." We hope you've enjoyed Season 5, Episode 8, Ghost in a Friend, of McGillicuddy and Murder's Pawn Shop. McGillicuddy and Murder's Pawn Shop is written and performed by Minerva Sweeney Wren, all rights reserved. Thank you for continuing all this way with Maud's adventures. New audio dramas are coming, and there is news on those, as well as fandom fun, if you follow me on Instagram and Twitter, at Meg Macaulay Inc. That's Inc, I-N-K. Please consider becoming a monthly supporter on Patreon, or if you can't commit right now, say thank you with a one-time donation. I now have Venmo, at Minerva Sweeney Wren. All links are in the description of this episode. McGillicuddy and Murder's Pawn Shop will continue with Season 5, Episode 9. Something Eternal.